And I'm delighted to say that we are now joined by Phil Kornbluth, President of Kornbluth Helium Consulting, to talk us through helium sourcing in 2023 and 2024.
Phil has a wealth of knowledge with over 40 years of industry experience and over 8 years of experience as a full-time consultant. During that time, Phil has completed projects for over 100 clients, working with a diverse group of these clients.
Phil has broad expertise in helium markets, including commercialization of new sources, management of bid processes, dispute resolution, and market strategy development, to name just a few. Subscribers of Gasworld will also be familiar with Phil's regular contributions and analysis across our platforms.
And with that, Phil, please take it away with your presentation.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob and Tom, for the nice introduction. I appreciate it. And just want to say I really would have liked to have been there in person at the APAC Industrial Gases Conference, but I've had a family vacation scheduled for close to a year that during this period. So I'm pre-recording the presentation, hopefully in the couple of weeks between now and when the presentation airs. The world isn't going to change too much. But anyway, I'm going to spend about a half an hour providing an update on what's going on in the helium market. Just before I start, just a brief introduction for my business. So Kornbluth Helium Consulting is a consultancy that's focused exclusively on the global helium business and exclusively on the commercial aspects of the business. So I'm the founder, president, sole employee. I've been at this for a little over 10 years, and it's been a full-time thing for the last 8. I've got 40 years of continuous involvement in the helium business, including a couple of stints running the businesses for 2 of the global majors, BOC and Matheson. I'm on Gasworld Magazine's editorial advisory board, and I'm a regular speaker at events like this one. And I'm independent from the helium majors, so I'm not an advocate or a tool for anybody in particular in this business, the big guys or the little guys. Okay, let's go into what we're here to talk about. So I want to start with a very brief recap of helium shortage 4.0, because again, we're still dealing with it, and just briefly talk about where what caused it, and I'll go into a little more detail about when I think it's going to end in the next few slides. But basically, the helium shortage 4.0 started in January of 2022, when the Bureau of Land Management's Crude Helium Enrichment Unit commenced the 6-month shutdown. That removed a pretty big chunk of supply from the market. More than 10% of global supply was taken out of the market. In addition to the BLM shutdown, other important causes of the shortage were the fact that Gazprom's Amur project, which is going to bring close to a 1/3 addition to the world supply, had started up briefly in September of 2021, then it experienced a fire and an explosion, and we haven't gotten any production from Gazprom's project until very recently. And then we had several planned and unplanned plant outages that also took supply out of the market. And as a result, 4 of the 5 helium majors declared force majeure and allocated supply throughout most of the shortage. Of course, like as you typically see with a shortage, contract prices for helium increased dramatically, with major cost increases from ExxonMobil and Qatar providing an extra catalyst for price increases. Okay, so where are we now? The shortage is still in place, but it has eased quite significantly this year. Of course, the BLM outage ended mid last year, and it's operated quite well for the last nearly year and a half since Messer took over responsibility for operating the Crude Helium Enrichment Unit from the BLM. We've had fewer maintenance outages in 2023. There was one significant one. Exxon took a shutdown in July and August that was significant, but a sign that the shortage was easing was that you barely felt a ripple from the Exxon shutdown. An important factor in the easing of the shortage is there's been a pretty significant slump in semiconductor manufacturing, which has reduced demand for helium, especially in Asian markets like China, Korea, and Taiwan that really cater to the electronics industry. At this time, 3 of the 5 helium majors are still allocating supply, but the allocation percentages have increased, and in some cases to 100%. So, the allocation are having a lot less impact than they did in 2022 and earlier in 2023. Production from Gazprom's Amur project finally commenced during the first week of September, and Amur is ramping up production from the first of 3 helium plants as we speak. It's still difficult to secure new supply in the market. I would say that pricing is experiencing an interesting cross current right now, as at some points in the helium supply chain, prices are going up, at others, prices are going down. And in particular, Exxon's customers are going to experience a large cost increase January 1st. They're trying to pass that increase through to their customers. But at the same time, you have prices in China down 30% this year, as the Chinese market is experiencing oversupply due to the weakness in the electronics market. And you also have cheap Russian product beginning to come into the Chinese market and influencing sentiment in the helium market in Asia. Spot prices, which are a relatively small part of the market, but they get an outsized amount of publicity, they've come down by more than 20% in recent months and they're now down around $600 a thousand, plus or minus $50 per MCF, in my view. Spot prices were $950 a thousand as recently as July, so they've been coming down steadily. I don't think they can come down too much more because they're going to be, the gap between spot prices and contract prices has come down considerably. So a little bit about the outlook for the next few months. The most likely scenario is continued easing of the shortage. Allocation seem likely to be increased, allocation percentages, that is, or removed entirely. Of course, the key variable for all of this, not just for the next few months, but for the next few years, is how well Amur does in terms of ramping up production and maintaining steady and reliable production. So as I mentioned, the first of 3 helium trains started up in September, but production is still in the ramp-up phase. There's also a second project in Russia that's less well known, but a company called the Irkutsk Oil Company, it's known as INK, also is ramping up. They started a project, they started deliveries in April. That is a potential 270 million foot a year project. They are hoping to get to 100% of production within the next few months. They are making strides to improve. I think the pricing cross current will continue. I think spot prices are going to continue to moderate with the reduced premium relative to contract prices. And this is again, I'm making a prediction here, but it's a prediction based on Amur running well. If Russian production ramps up reasonably well, then we could see a tight balance between supply and demand restored in the next 3 to 6 months. So that's, again, a lot depends on Amur. I want to talk a little bit more about the Amur project specifically, just because I think it's going to be the biggest factor affecting helium markets really for the next, 4 or 5 years. So what I have in my personal modeling is I have about 400 million feet of new supply coming into the market next year, and greater than 1 billion cubic feet of new supply from Amur by 2026. with capacity to produce 2 BCF per year or more. I'm not sure if they'll ever get to that level, but that's what the nameplate capacity of the three helium plants would be. Russia would become the world's third largest helium supplier when Amur ramps up after the U.S. and Qatar. Qatar is going to be number one, most likely, by the time they start up Qatar 4. And so if Amur is able to operate reliably and overcome logistics challenges, uh, the supply from Amur should diminish the future threat of sustained shortages, which, we've experienced four of them since 2006, and it's kind of expected now that, we're going to have helium shortages coming and going. That I don't think will be the case if Amur can get their act together and become a reliable supplier. The supply from Amur will initially be low cost and will have a competitive advantage in Asian markets. And it's going to take market share in Asia from both Qatar and the US, reducing US exports to both Europe and Asia. So a lot more of the US supply is going to be staying home. Um, Due to sanctions, geographic proximity, and less complex logistics, China, especially, and other non sanctioning Asian countries will have preferential access to supply from more. And then the last point I would make is that the dependence on Russian supply eventually will introduce another layer of political risk to the helium supply chain. So it's going to have a big impact, a complicated impact, and it's going to be very interesting to see how things develop. Just briefly, I want to show folks who may not be familiar with the location of the Amur plant. If you look at this map uh, toward the very far to the right, about 80% of the way to the right, you see Amur gas plant, and it's very close to the border with China and the Amur River. And you can see that it's not too far from Vladivostok, all the way to the right. That's the major port to get product from Amur to world markets, but also there are gradually a couple of bridge crossings are opening up between Russia and China, so that this product will be able to get to China without having to go on a container ship. So that will make the logistics to China much better in the future. So again, just to show you where it's at. My next slide, I just want to show a couple of brief pictures. What does Amur look like? What is this giant plant? Well, on the left side of this slide, you can see the gas processing plant, which is one of the world's largest gas processing plants. It's more than a $15 billion investment, and it's a giant refinery. It occupies land area of 900 hectares. It's huge. And then on the right-hand side, you can see one of the three helium plants. This picture was actually taken back in September of 2021, when the first helium plant was when they had an opening ceremony. But you can see it's also a pretty pretty big plant, but it's a small, very small compared to the gas processing plant. A very small footprint compared to the GPP. Again, I think given what's going on in the world right now, this presentation wouldn't be complete without a little bit of a discussion on Ukraine and sanctions. So right now, there are no direct sanctions on Russian helium exports, but sanctions have, clearly had a lot of impact on this project. So, number one, sanctions delayed the restart of Amur, and as well as the startup of INK's project. I mean, it took roughly, let's say, more. We went from a year and a half or so from the explosion in January of 2022 to restart in September of 2023. And that period of time would have been, I believe, a lot less if not for the difficulty that Gazprom had in securing replacement equipment and not being able to access technical support from the West and things like that. Helium production from Algeria has been reduced because of the war. That's an indirect impact because gas that normally would have been processed into LNG at two plants in Algeria that would have provided feed gas for the helium plants in Algeria was redirected to the undersea pipelines that take natural gas to Europe to replace the supply that was lost from Gazprom. So again, that's not an impact that it might be intuitive, but there's a significant impact there. Air Products and Linde both terminated their offtake agreements with Gazprom, leaving Gazprom with a lot of unsold helium that they've been scrambling to sell to others. The Polish oil and gas company cut off their sales to Russian gas companies. And sanctions have increased the difficulty of shipping containers to and from Vladivostok or via road transport to Europe. So, Russian trucks and chassis are prohibited from crossing the EU-Russian border. So you have to change chassis, change trucks, etc. at the border. A lot of Western carriers are no longer calling on Vladivostok. So the logistics are difficulty getting to and from Russia. A significant factor is that there's an export licensing requirement for U.S. manufactured, and that means Gardner Cryogenics helium containers to be used for the delivery of Russian helium. So the great majority of the global container fleet is Gardner containers, and which means that there's a lot of the containers that had been acquired to transport Russian helium can't be used for that purpose. It is okay to use Linde or Nippon Sanso containers to deliver Russian helium. So U.S. companies and companies that have a major presence in the U.S., including the three major off-takers that are left, Messer, Matheson, and Air Liquide, they can't use Gardner containers for the delivery of Russian helium. So again, that I do believe is going to be a constraint on the flow of Russian helium to market in the next few years. Companies that are based in countries who ignore U.S. trade restrictions, so countries like China, India, Middle East, they'll continue to send Gardner containers to Russia. So it's the U.S. Government can only do so much in terms of controlling the flow of Gardner containers to Russia. So that there will still be Gardner containers going to Russia, but not by U.S. companies. Okay, this is an important chart about the outlook for global helium supply versus demand, and I'm going to simplify this. The rust-colored bars are supply, the purple bars are demand. And you can see that in 2023, demand exceeds supply, but not by that much. In 2022, the gap was bigger. By 2024, I believe supply will slightly exceed demand, and we will be back in a tight balance, again, if a war ramps up. But the trend here is that capacity utilization, which is the line that crosses through the bars, capacity utilization is going down. It's trending down, and by the time we get to, let's say, 2028 or so, we're going to be in the mid 80s for an extended period of time. And I believe that an oversupply of helium is likely toward the end of the decade. Now, there's two things that we need to watch to make that happen. One is more ramping up and having 3 trains in operation by, let's say, 2026. And Qatar 4, which is going to bring 1.5 BCF of supply into the market, starting up and ramping up in 2027. If those two events happen, there will be an oversupply. Now, nothing's guaranteed, but with all of the publicity and all the startups that are out there putting out press releases, the two things that really, really matter are Amur and Qatar 4. All right, I want to talk a little bit about some of the other trends and factors going on in the market, and then I'll wrap up. So, demand growth, I think it's going to be, we're going to see modest underlying demand growth. The applications that are going to drive growth are semiconductor manufacturing and aerospace, partially offset by reduced demand for MRI and demand destruction due to the significant price increases we've experienced during helium-4. Now, again, the chip industry experienced a slump this year. I was just at a conference where folks said that chip manufacturing was down about 9% this year. It's expected to bounce back next year and then grow at double-digit rates for the next few years after that. So this year, demand from the chip industry is down. There are going to be significant cost increases from ExxonMobil and Qatar that are providing support for high prices. So even, again, there's the cross currents. There's a big price increase from ExxonMobil January 1st. That puts pressure on the Exxon's customers to raise prices. The start of production from Amur has impacted market sentiment significantly, especially in Asia. And as I mentioned, these pricing cross currents are very interesting right now. The majors are trying to pass significant price increases through to maintain margins after they absorb an increase from ExxonMobil on January 1. The independent producers, they're reducing prices as contracts renew. Certainly the availability of cheap supply from Russia has impacted price expectations in Asia. And as I mentioned, prices have fallen significantly in China already. And the premium for spot loads has shrunk significantly. So it's a complicated situation. It's not that all prices are going up in unison and they're not all going down in unison. It's kind of like, where are you in the supply chain? Another thing that we're seeing is increased interest in developing private storage facilities as companies are losing confidence in the BLM system and are preparing for the post-BLM period. So we have Air Liquide has a storage facility in Germany. Air Products has one in Beaumont, Texas. A company called Caliche has announced their intention to build another helium storage facility also in Texas. Here's some really interesting things I think that are going on. The helium majors still dominate global helium supply, but smaller gas companies and even a few large end users are increasingly buying containers and seeking to purchase helium directly from producers. So, the iron grip of the majors on helium supply is starting to fray a little bit. There's an unprecedented number of helium exploration startups providing opportunities for tier 2 gas companies to bypass the helium majors to secure supply. So there's at least 30 helium startups right now. The Ukraine and Amur increased concerns about geopolitical risk. You can throw the Israeli-Palestinian war on top of that. As well, increasing concerns about political risk. But the trade sanctions are providing openings for tier 2 gas companies based in non-sanctioning countries to gain direct access to supply. So you can see that there's forces at play that are, helping the smaller gas companies obtain helium supply. I think the business is going to become more regional, with Russian supply becoming an important factor in Asian countries that don't comply with U.S. sanctions. And again, as more tier 2 gas companies gain direct access to supply, the dominance of the majors is going to begin to erode. A little bit on the BLM, and then I will wrap up. Again, there's been a lot in the news about the future of the BLM system. I think most folks are aware that the BLM was mandated to privatize their helium assets by the Helium Stewardship Act of 2013. There's been kind of a complex soap opera playing out, but there was supposed to be an auction of these assets on August 31st, 2022. The industrial gas industry lobbied aggressively to delay the asset sale, and they succeeded in pushing it back. The sales process restarted finally on July 12th of 2023, and bids are due on January 25th of 2024. So there was, and that represents a 2-month delay again due to some recent developments. Air Products filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction to postpone the sale, but that injunction was denied earlier in November. The BLM system continues to operate to store privately owned crude helium and to support the continued operation of private facilities, refining facilities linked to the BLM pipeline. And this is really an important point that a lot of people don't understand, that even if the assets are auctioned off, the BLM system is going to continue to operate for a number of years, but the terms associated with using the pipeline and user fees are likely to change after the existing storage contracts expire on September 30th, 2027, if the assets are privatized. So the important point here is that the BLM system is not shutting down when it's sold. It's going to have a private owner, and but it's going to continue to operate. Now, another important point is that the BLM, there is a scenario where the BLM conducts the auction, but doesn't necessarily accept the bids. So it depends on receiving acceptable bids in the January auction. And the last point about the BLM is that the deliverable volume through the BLM pipeline is going to continue to decline. Right now, it's about 650 million feet a year, but it's going to continue to decline, and helium production tied to the BLM pipeline is likely to consolidate. Okay, so to wrap up my summary and conclusions, I know I've gone through a lot of material in what's going to be a half an hour. The key points: helium shortage 4.0 is going to continue to wind down in the coming months as long as Amur and INK production continues to ramp up. I believe we will see a tight balance between supply and demand by sometime in the mid part of 2024. I think we're going to see modest demand growth with electronics replacing MRI as the leading helium application, and frankly, leaving it in the dust in the next few years as MRI is on a slow decline and electronics should be on a pretty good growth pace. I think the trade restrictions due to the war in Ukraine will continue to create uncertainty because those trade restrictions can change. I think pricing will continue to experience cross currents certainly during 2024, with the majors still trying to increase prices in Western markets, but weak pricing in China due to the oversupply caused by soft demand from electronics and the availability of less expensive product from Russia. I expect an oversupply later in the decade as more production ramps up and Qatar 4 enters the market in 2027. I think the dominance of the majors is going to gradually erode as the smaller gas companies increasingly gain direct access to supply. Last but not least, I think the helium business is going to become more regional as China and other non-sanctioning countries increasingly rely on Russian supply, and product from Qatar goes more so to Europe and Asia, and U.S. supply is increasingly left to stay home in North America. So that is my presentation. I know it was a lot of information to get through in a half an hour, but hopefully it was useful. And then just want to put in a quick plug for the Helium Super Summit in 2024 in October. We just had I would say, a great helium summit in Houston a few weeks ago, and we had over 400 people attending. It was a tremendous networking event, and I hope to see a lot of people there in 2024. So thank you, everybody.
No, absolutely. Thank you, Phil. As you say, a lot of information there, but I'm sure everyone in the room will agree that's a great presentation there. I'd like to return to you with a question, if I could. I've made some notes here. On the point of the BLM, you spoke about it a little bit, but could you just emphasise the future of the BLM, or could we even perhaps see further legal action?
Well, it's hard to say, except so far the Air Products lawsuit that was aimed at postponing the sale by several years was thrown out by a Texas court. So I guess I'm not able to say if someone if there would be other legal action, but as of now, the legal action was tossed aside. So the auction is going to proceed. That doesn't preclude that there could be some other legal action down the road.
Sure, thanks for that, Phil. Appreciate the fact you don't have a crystal ball there. One more question from me, returning to AMER and sanctions. It played a big part in your presentation there, but how big a role will these sanctions have on Europe and the wider world?
Well, if nothing changes from where we are now, the impact isn't going to be huge because really the helium from Amur would have flowed primarily to Asia with or without sanctions. The difference is that with the sanctions, the termination of the Air Products and Linde contracts, Gazprom is moving aggressively to find replacement customers, and they're offering pricing low price product to tier 2 and tier 3 gas companies who would not have been expected to have an opportunity to buy Russian helium directly. So you're going to have a number of smaller gas companies in China and India and the Middle East and maybe a few other places who are going to have access to Russian supply, and it will, I would say, create increase the competitive intensity in those markets. One other point that I would make, though, is that I do believe that the ramp up in supply from Russia will be slower than it would have been without sanctions, because there's just not going to be enough containers available to take away the potential production. So it's going to have an impact, but it won't be a tremendous impact.
Interesting stuff. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Now, you have already covered the supply and demand outlook, should we say, for potentially the next decade or to the end of this decade. You mentioned supply exceeding demand in 2024. We're hearing that the semiconductor market is about to return to year-on-year growth. You alluded to this yourself as well. So the next logical question would be, are helium markets ready right now to cope with a hardening in demand from the electronics sector?
No, not right now. I mean, even in our best case scenario for next year, which is a healthy ramp up from Amur and INK, and an increased contribution from some of the startups, because some of the startups are producing helium in North America. With a bounce back in demand from the chip industry, the market's going to be very tight next year. I mean, the end of the shortage We're not flipping a switch to ample supply, but we could get to a tight balance next year. And I would say that's, probably an optimistic case.
Sure. Okay. And staying on that applications front, Phil, you mentioned MRI and the kind of decline in demand for helium. I just wanted to ask, I mean, we're in the APAC region right now. It's very different healthcare systems to other parts of the world, of course. But why is there that decline? Is that because of recovery and recycling systems on these kind of new generation MRI machines, or is it something else?
Well, there's a couple of factors that have reduced MRI demand over the years. One is that the major magnet manufacturing facilities where the superconducting magnets are manufactured and cooled down, they've all installed recycling capability. So there's a big reduction in demand at those facilities. But then the longer term factor is that the newer generation scanners have a much lower helium boil off rate than the older machines. So, you have scanners coming into the market that might require one top off per year, where the older generation machines, required many top offs per year. They might have required the helium to be replenished every few weeks. And what you have happening is that gradually the newer scanners are replacing the older scanners. So the helium replenishment requirement per scanner is on a long-term downtrend, and that's really why you have this slow decline in helium demand, because it's going to continue for a long period of time. The MRI scanners, there's still more of them going in, so there's still lots of MRI scanners being installed. It's still a healthy business.
Sure, absolutely. I'm sure there's lots of different generations all around the world of those machines. Interesting to see the MRI come down, and obviously the electronics is ramping up. Just finally, Phil, you mentioned startups. We know there's an absolute wealth of startups out there all across the world, in fact. Are you able to tell us what some of the most promising new sources are, in your view, some of the new sources and startups?
Yeah, well, out of the startups as a category, the most successful so far has been North American Helium, who has 7 small plants operating in Saskatchewan, and they're producing over 150 million feet a year now, and they're on a path for continued development of new sources. If I was talking about potential, I really like a project in Wyoming, pretty much in the same neighborhood as the ExxonMobil plant, by a company called Blue Spruce Operating. That has the potential to produce up to 800 million feet a year. Not right away. It's a project that probably we're looking at 2028 kind of startup. But they will, I believe, be soliciting bids for their helium late this year, early next year. And it's the same gas that Exxon processes. It's a very long-lived resource, and in a proven area, and in an area there's very little political risk. I think I'll briefly mention Tanzania as well. Tanzania is still very speculative, but we're at the point where the two companies exploring there, Noble Helium and Helium One, they're both drilling their first wells, and within a relatively short period of time, we're going to find out if Tanzania is real with a big potential, or just a story that isn't going to lead to any helium production. So that's very interesting. Some people are extremely optimistic about that, and others are not. And you don't know what you have till you drill the wells.
Absolutely. Well, thanks once again, Phil, as always.
Yeah, thanks for that, Phil. A great presentation there, and thanks for fielding our questions too. But with that, Rob, it's back to you on stage there in KL.
Okay. Thank you.